Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Bruce R. Kindig. And we're going to be discussing his amazing book, Courage and Devotion, a history of Bankhead's, Scott's, Tennessee's battery in the American Civil War. Now, it's available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. And people, I do want to point out quickly that Bruce was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best publishers in the business, Author Reputation Press. So if you or anyone you know have a book that they'd like moved, well, give yourself the best gift you could possibly give. Contact ARP and have their wonderful team move it for you. You can find out more information on them through authorreputationpress.com. And listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Bruce here on the line. Now, right there in the title, well, really in the subtitle, you're going to get an idea of the conversation that's about to ensue. Okay, people, we're going to talk about the American Civil War today. But I bet you a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today and a lot of the information that you're going to find on those pages probably aren't what you learned in history class. Okay, now I'm here for it. You guys know I've always considered myself a person that is always really loved history, right? I'm just engulfed in it, right? I'm fascinated by it. Not so much American history. It's always been more world history. But hey, curiosity is curiosity. So I'm right there, and I'm loving the conversation we're about to have. This is going to be something that I think is really going to take a lot of people by surprise. Because when we talk about the American Civil War, we've always been told a lot of the main topic points, right? When we're talking about the American Civil War, unless you are someone that is considering yourself a history buff, you are in that particular field career-wise. Other than that, you probably have a lot of the same information that has been taught in history classes across the country. Now, here's the thing. The history of the Civil War goes much deeper than what we've been told. And in this book, it's going to be littered with wonderful pieces of information and, just a quick side note, well-documented information, okay? When you pick up the book, you'll see what I mean. But it goes a lot deeper than just the main figures that we've been taught about. In this book, Bruce talks about a lot of the enlisted soldiers and really areas of the Civil War that aren't or that haven't been focused on as much. And then even a step further, one of the big things that he was talking about to me on the pre-screening call is not only who these people were, but why they made a lot of the decisions they made, either in entering the war, in exiting the war. People, I'm telling you, this is a nonstop page turner in a wonderful, wonderful education for everyone that picks it up. And at the end of the day, Bruce is the expert, okay? He's written the book, he's done the research, and he's going to be able to articulate it much better than I ever could. So let's bring him here with us, okay? Bruce, first and foremost, man, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, and thank you for that fine introduction.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the pleasure is all ours, Bruce, and we're very much looking forward to this. And one thing that I often say to my guests when they compliment me on my opening is, listen, I wish I could be so humble as to just take that and just, take it for what it is. Well, at the end of the day, Bruce, you started it, man. You laid down this wonderful foundation. You wrote the book, and because of how clear you've articulated your perspective, it makes it very easy for me to follow. So thank you for my intro, or thank you for thanking me for my intro. But at the end of the day, man, listen, you started it. You did it. Now, Bruce, before we jump into the book, I do think it's important to learn a little bit more about your background. So let's start there, please. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I graduated from the University of Northern Iowa with a history degree. And I also got a master's degree a few years later from Northern Iowa as well. I taught in public schools for 46 years. I was a public school teacher, and I taught everything in history and some other subjects as well. So I'm fairly well versed on all of the general topics from world history and American history, but my main focus started about in the 1980s with the Civil War, and I started reading books galore. Not that I hadn't read them before, but I had a particular interest and a keen eye for detail, and that's kind of what I did when I decided to write this book, was that I had to do it different than others. You've got to have a book with, a general theme, and here's the direction we're going, but I broke it down into details, and I broke it down into details of time and place. And we're dealing with a small area, basically, because we're dealing mostly in the areas of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia, just in that area with the Army of Tennessee. Not to be confused with Robert E. Lee and Gettysburg and all the battlefields in Virginia, because Bankhead and Scott's Battery did not fight there. They were pretty much in the West. And by the way, I should mention the name Bankhead/Scott's. Bankhead commanded the battery for the first year, and then William L. Scott commanded the battery for 2 more years. And in 1863, at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, the battery was overrun and destroyed. It ceased to exist, even though some of the men continued on in other units. And in the book, in the final chapters, I follow those men in those other units that they went to. Some of the men signed up in early 1861 and were still there, surrendering in May of 1865.
Wow. Fantastic. Bruce, listen, so much to unpack there. First and foremost, now it all makes sense, right? You're not just someone that is particularly interested in history, although you are. You are an educator through and through, man. Listen, it doesn't stop once you leave the classroom. I love it. And I'm just going to take a second and put out, I had a very brief stint in education myself, and a lot of family and friends that I have currently are also educators or have been in the past. And listen, man, I'm just going to take the opportunity and thank you for all of the years of devotion that you put in the classroom, because we know anybody that's ever been in that realm, anybody that's ever been in that world understands teachers never get the amount of, or really just educators, right? Because it's not just teachers. Educators never get the amount of credit that they deserve for how many hats they have to wear, because it is a very, very difficult job, and so very much, in my opinion, severely underappreciated. So thank you very much for all of the work that you put in shaping and molding the minds of future generations.
Well, thank you. One of the things you had to do as a teacher is present a story, deal with that with students, make it interesting to them. So I got fairly good at becoming a storyteller on various topics. And so when I went to writing the book, I just took what I developed as far as how to tell a story and put it onto paper. And that's what I've done in this book.
Bruce, next question that I want to get into, let's talk about inspiration for a second, okay? Now, it's clear to me why this particular topic is interesting to you. Right? Again, knowing your background, knowing your history, this, of course, is something right up your alley. So I can connect those dots. But why did you feel compelled or inspired to write the book and put it out for the masses, Bruce?
Well, I was doing some research well over 30 years ago, and I ran across this battery, and I just got interested in it. And then I read about a stained glass window in Bolivar, Tennessee, that was put there in 1867 that gave homage to Lieutenant John Marsh. And I wondered, well, who is that? Never heard of him. And found out that he had been one of the lieutenants in Scott's Battery in 1863. And he actually commanded the battery at the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, he was killed at the Battle of Franklin, serving on the staff of another general. And this stained glass window was then put up in honor of this man. Now, Marsh had lived in the area, and I've been there trying to find, they used to have a cotton plantation. Well, you couldn't find that anymore. That area of Tennessee is more like a tree farm. I mean, forestry is more important there today than cotton growing. So I kind of got a feel of the area, and I was able to go to the church and photograph with the permission there, photograph that window, and that picture is inside my book. But it was the inspiration. Now I wanted to find more, and I wanted some details, and I found it. Nobody had written about Bankheads or Scott's batteries. There were no regimental histories. Captain Scott himself wrote a 5-page history in about 1885, but he was mostly just telling about the officers and a few other things, and I could tell that he didn't know what I know today. It was all lost. Everything was forgotten. And modernly, I have access to the National Archives and libraries and papers. And so that's how I got my inspiration and then started working on this. I spent over 30 years gathering the information before I finally said, if I don't write this book and I were to die, all of my collections of information, all this stuff I have would probably just get thrown away and be lost. So I said, I've got to write this all up. And so that's what I did.
People, again, we're here on the line with Bruce R. Kindig. We're discussing his amazing book, Courage and Devotion, a history of Bankheads / Scott's Tennessee Battery in the American Civil War. It's available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. Bruce, next question that I'd love to go into in a fantastic segue that you've established here. Let's go into some of that research because I know it is extensive. Talk to us a little bit more about the research that you did in preparation for this book.
Well, the official records of the Civil War, the actual title is the Official Records of the War of the Rebellion. And it was put together in the late 1880s and 1890s. I think it was finally published in 1901, 128 volumes. Well, you can research in there, and I have, and now it's online, so you can do it at home these days. But in there you can find after-action reports, and it was very interesting to read those that Bankhead wrote or that William L. Scott wrote. But you also had to get into the reports written by the regiments that were beside the battery or near the battery in battle, and you'd get some information that way. I've always looked for diaries, and although there is no diary that I've ever found from somebody from Scott's battery, I have read some diaries of neighboring units, a person who would make a comment about Bankhead or Scott. And so I gathered a lot of that information by reading other diaries. And I even read I think it was the 3rd Minnesota Infantry that was responsible for overrunning the battery on Missionary Ridge. Well, their commanding officer, he wrote a history of their unit, and of course there's a chapter in there of the capture of that Confederate battery that I'm interested in from their perspective. And of course, once I decided to write, I had to go to libraries and I had to take trips. So I spent a number of days, not weeks, in Tennessee and Kentucky, going to the libraries, a few, I should mention my wife was so good. I'd go to a room in a library and do research, and she'd read magazines in another room. She was so good about that. Or I'd go traipsing through a battlefield, and she didn't want to do that, so she sat in the car and waited for me. And again, what a wonderful woman to let me go off and do the thing that I really wanted to do. And that's kind of how it went.
There you have it. Bruce, I think it's safe to assume the answer to this next question, but you know what happens when you assume. So I'm not going to do that to you, man. I have you here on the line. Let's go directly to the source. Who would you say is your intended audience with this book? And what is the main message that you hope that they receive from it?
Well, my main audience was probably Civil War enthusiasts, but I have discovered that there are those people who have an interest maybe in family genealogy. And so as far as the enthusiast goes, I've got everything they want, if I could find it. I leave no stone unturned. I like details, and they're full of details here. If they ordered 125 canteens, requisitioned them, I found that, somehow I got it into the book. As far as genealogy goes, I get into individual people. There were a total of about 250 people that served in this battery at one time or another. Never more than the highest ever at one time was about 130, and usually they were below 100. So there were people coming in and people going out. Only a small number of people served the entire 4 years of the war. The vast majority of people served only 1 year. It might have been the first year, or it might have been a year or two later. It's interesting that I was able to meet descendants of some of these people, and they were really surprised when I was able to find them, or maybe they found me. And then we exchanged information. Some of these people I actually sat in their living rooms. And I remember one gentleman, he lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and he had ancestors that fought both in the North and the South. And when I came in to talk to him, he was surprised that I came to seek information from him about his Confederate ancestor, whereas he hardly knew that one. He had a Union ancestor he knew fairly well, but it was very interesting to talk to these people. And I could enlighten them, and they could enlighten me. And I brought that into my book so that there's individuals in here that they became deserters and left the Army. And then I meet their descendants. And we have a nice chat about that.
Bruce, curiosity for myself here with this next one. What would you say was a highlight for you in writing the book? Or if not a highlight, something that surprised you that you weren't anticipating before you began?
Oh, I don't know. We go for the highlight. It might have been the day I was able to go and get the photograph of the window in the church. I live in Iowa. So this was just a short story here. I got permission to come down on a Sunday when the church met. And so here I go. We leave Saturday morning, drive all the way to Tennessee. I get a motel room for Saturday night. Then I go to church on Sunday with the parishioners, and I get look at the picture there. And then, of course, they get to meet me because I go to the potluck afterwards, and there were some wonderful folks that I met. And I remember this one lady, she was like 90 years old, and she was saying how it must have been her grandfather, but maybe it was her father, was the doctor for some general and all this kind of stuff. And these people were telling me these tidbits and stuff. Not that I could use any of that in my book, but it's just so wonderful to meet people and have a discussion, your ancestors and so forth. Well, church is over. There it is. It's about noon, and I got to drive all the way back home, which I do. So I drove all the way down there for a photograph for a weekend.
There you go.
But it was well worth it.
Yeah, that's an important photograph. That's an important photograph there for you, Bruce. Thank you very much for articulating that, man. Listen, we know about this amazing book. We know about your background. I want to focus now on the future. Bruce, please tell me there's another book upcoming, man. What's on the horizon for you?
Well, I don't have another Civil War book on the horizon, but I have written a few other books. I've written a book called George Washington Starts a War, and it deals with the Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War in the 1750s. And it starts with George Washington started the war by ordering the firing on French troops in 1753. And we just make the comment as we end the book that he ended a war in 1783 in the American Revolution. I've also written a book on, it's all historical, and it's entitled The Evil Party. Now, this is a political book, although it's historical, because I write about the founding of the United States and how we formed the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I go into things about the Dred Scott case, get into the Civil War, particularly the 13th Amendment, and I take it right on up into about 2020, with the election in 2020. And one of the things I've done is I've made it a question book about good and evil. And it starts out very simple, like the Ten Commandments. That's the directions of good and evil. Well, then you start applying the good and the evil to the documents and the applications in history. So those who might be interested in some of our background of our nation in that regards might be interested in that particular book.
People, I'm telling you, this is the gift that you need to have on your shelf, okay? It's a clear book for history buffs, right? For anybody that is interested in that. But really, for anybody that just wants to be educated, this is such a fantastic resource to add to your shelf. It's an even better gift to add to someone else's. I'm going to say it for you once more just to re-impress it for you. We're here on the line with Bruce R. Kindig. We just finished discussing his amazing book called Courage and Devotion, a history of Bankheads / Scott's Tennessee Battery in the American Civil War. Available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. Head on over there today. Pick your copies up and just get lost in a wonderful education. I'm telling you, this is a fantastic resource that you need to add. Head on over there today. Pick up your copies. Bruce, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such an honor, man. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
Well, thank you for having me.